So I'm 29, female, and 3 days ago I walked into my parents' workplace as their new CEO, and the look of absolute horror on their faces when they realized their worthless failure of a daughter was now their boss is something I'll never forget. For context, my parents and I haven't spoken in over 4 years after they completely disowned me and told me I was a disgrace to the family name who would never amount to anything. They literally told me I was dead to them and that they were ashamed to call me their daughter. Well, turns out karma has a twisted sense of humor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me paint you the picture of what happened 3 days ago, because honestly, I'm still processing it myself. I had just completed the acquisition of Thornfield Industries, a mid-sized manufacturing company based here in Millbrook Valley. It was my third major acquisition this year for my investment firm, and I was doing my routine first-day walkthrough as the new owner when my assistant Jade handed me the employee roster to review. That's when I saw it. 2 names that made my blood run cold: Robert Ashford and Patricia Ashford, my parents, working in the accounting department of the company I had just bought. I knew they worked for some manufacturing company, but I had no idea it was Thornfield. Why would I? We've been no contact for 4 years. And back when they kicked me out of their lives, I was just a broke college dropout working retail jobs to survive. The last thing on my mind was keeping tabs on their employment status. My first instinct was to turn around and leave, maybe sell the company immediately. Anything to avoid this confrontation. But then I remembered every cruel word they'd said to me, every time they'd called me a failure, every time they'd compared me to other people's successful children, and I decided I wasn't running anymore. You see, my parents had always been obsessed with traditional success. Dad worked his way up in manufacturing over 30 years, starting on the factory floor and eventually making it to senior accountant. Mom did bookkeeping for the same company for 25 years. They lived for stability, routine, and what they called honest work. To them, anything that wasn't a traditional 9-to-5 job with benefits and a pension was basically worthless. When I dropped out of business school at 21 to start my own company, they lost their minds. They said I was throwing my life away, that I was irresponsible, that I'd end up homeless and crawling back to them begging for help. When my first startup failed spectacularly and I had to move back home temporarily, they made my life absolutely miserable. Every day was a lecture about how I should have listened to them, how I should get a real job, how I was embarrassing them in front of their friends and neighbors. But the final straw came when I told them about my second business venture. I had scraped together enough money to start a small investment consultancy, working out of a tiny shared office space in downtown Millbrook. I was excited, finally feeling like I was on the right track again. Instead of support, they gave me an ultimatum: abandon this foolish pipe dream and get a proper job with benefits, or they would cut me off completely. I chose my business. They chose to disown me. The last conversation we ever had was 4 years ago in their living room in Elmhurst Heights. Dad stood up, pointed at the door and said, "Patricia, our daughter is dead to us. She's chosen to be a failure, and I won't watch her destroy herself anymore. She's not welcome in this house until she comes to her senses and gets a real job like a responsible adult." Mom just nodded and added, "We raised you better than this, but clearly we failed somewhere. Don't come back here until you're ready to be the daughter we deserve, not this embarrassment you've become." I walked out that door with nothing but my laptop bag and my car, and I swore I'd prove them wrong. Fast forward 4 years, and here I am, CEO and majority owner of Valdris Capital, one of the fastest-growing investment firms in the Pacific Northwest. I've acquired 12 companies, employ over 300 people across multiple states, and last month Forbes featured me in their 30 under 30 inches list. The worthless failure they disowned now has a net worth that would make their heads spin. But standing in the hallway of Thornfield Industries 3 days ago, staring at their names on that employee roster, all I felt was this weird mix of vindication and dread. Part of me was excited to see their faces when they realized what I'd become. Another part of me just felt sad that it had to be this way. I made the decision to handle the employee introduction meeting personally instead of delegating it to my regional manager. I wanted to look them in the eye when they learned who their new boss was. Call it petty, call it closure, call it whatever you want. I needed this moment. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main conference room. As I walked down the hallway toward that room, my heart was pounding like I was about to give the most important presentation of my life. In a way, I guess I was. This was 4 years of hard work, sleepless nights, failed deals, successful acquisitions, and personal growth, all leading to this one moment of reckoning. I straightened my blazer, checked my reflection in the glass door, and walked into that conference room, ready to face the people who had written me off as worthless. Little did I know that this confrontation would set off a chain of events that would completely upend not just their lives, but mine too, in ways I never could have imagined. The next hour would change everything between us forever, and honestly, I'm still not sure if I'm proud of how I handled it, or if I went too far. But I guess you'll have to stick around to find out what happened next, because this story is just getting started. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before I dive into what happened in that conference room, I need you to understand where my life is right now, because the contrast with where I was 4 years ago is absolutely insane, and it makes what my parents did to me even more unforgivable. Today, I live in a stunning penthouse overlooking the Cascade River in downtown Millbrook. It's a 3,000-square-foot space with floor-to-ceiling windows, a rooftop garden, and a view that literally takes people's breath away when they visit. I bought it last year in cash. No mortgage, no co-signers, just a wire transfer that cleared in 2 days. The same parents who said I'd end up homeless are now working for a company I own outright. My typical day starts at 5:30 a.m. with yoga on my private rooftop, followed by coffee while I review international market reports, since Valdres Capital now has investments across 3 continents. By 7 a.m., I'm usually on calls with our London office, and by 9 a.m. I'm in my corner office on the 23rd floor of the Meridian Tower, the same building where I used to work part-time cleaning offices during college just to pay rent. I have a team of 12 investment specialists working directly under me, plus another 30 employees across our satellite offices in Portland, Seattle, and Denver. My assistant Jade has been with me for 2 years now, and she's incredibly efficient. She handles my calendar, screens my calls, and honestly, she's become one of my closest friends. When you're building an empire, you don't have time for a huge social circle, but the people in your inner circle become family. Speaking of family, I've built my own chosen family over these past 4 years. My business partner and best friend Cameron runs our West Coast operations from our Portland office. We met at a networking event 3 years ago when we were both struggling entrepreneurs, and now we're both millionaires. There's also my mentor, Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, who's been guiding me through the complexities of major acquisitions. She's this brilliant woman in her 60s who built and sold 3 companies before she turned 50, and she saw potential in me when nobody else did. My romantic life has been pretty quiet, honestly. I dated someone seriously for about 8 months last year, a software engineer named Trevor who was sweet but couldn't handle the demands of my career. He kept complaining that I worked too much, that I was always traveling for deals, that I cared more about my business than our relationship. Maybe he was right, but after being told by my own parents that I was worthless, building this empire became my whole identity. I wasn't ready to compromise on that, and I'm still not sure I am. Financially, I'm in a position I never dreamed possible 4 years ago. Valdres Capital is valued at approximately $15 million, and my personal net worth just crossed the 8-figure mark. I drive a Tesla Model S, own a vacation cabin in the Whistling Pines Mountains, and I'm currently in talks to acquire a resort property in Costa Rica. The girl who used to eat ramen noodles for 3 meals a day, now has a personal chef who comes in twice a week to meal prep. But here's the thing that really matters. I'm genuinely happy with the life I've built. Every morning when I wake up in my penthouse, I feel this deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that I proved everyone wrong. Not just my parents, but every person who doubted me, every investor who passed on my early pitches, every former classmate who whispered that I'd never amount to anything after dropping out. I've been featured in 3 major business publications in the past year. Pacific Business Monthly did a cover story on me titled "The Dropout Who Built an Empire." Investment Weekly included me in their Rising Stars Under 30 Inches feature. And like I mentioned, Forbes put me on their prestigious list, which was honestly a surreal moment. The day that article came out, I got congratulations messages from hundreds of LinkedIn connections, former professors, and even some old friends who had lost touch with me over the years. My daily routine is incredibly structured now. I work out religiously, eat clean, read at least 1 business book per month, and I'm currently learning Mandarin because we're exploring expansion into Asian markets. I've also been seeing a therapist, Dr. Rachel Summers, for the past year and a half. Not because I'm struggling, but because when you're running a multi-million-dollar company, you need someone to help you process the stress and keep your mental health in check. The therapy has been incredibly helpful, especially in dealing with the family trauma. Dr. Summers has helped me understand that my drive to succeed isn't just about proving my parents wrong, though that's definitely part of it. It's about proving to myself that I'm worthy of success, that I can build something meaningful, that my ideas and instincts have value even when the people closest to me said they didn't. I live alone in my penthouse, but I'm rarely lonely. My life is full of purpose, challenge, and achievement. I wake up excited about the deals I'm working on, the companies I'm helping to grow, the jobs I'm creating. When I acquired my first company 2 years ago, a struggling tech startup with 8 employees, I was able to turn it around, and now it employs 23 people with full benefits. That kind of impact drives me more than any personal relationship ever could. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me that still craved my parents' approval. Even after everything they put me through, even after building this incredible life without them, there was still this tiny voice in my head that wondered what they'd think if they knew what I'd accomplished. Would they finally be proud? Would they finally admit they were wrong about me? Well, I was about to find out, because in about 30 minutes I was going to walk into that conference room and watch their faces when they realized their worthless daughter was now signing their paychecks. And honestly, despite all my success, despite my penthouse and my empire and my Forbes feature, I was terrified about how this confrontation was going to go down. To really understand why that conference room confrontation hit so hard, you need to know the full history of how my parents shaped me into someone who was never good enough in their eyes, no matter what I achieved. Growing up in the Ashford household in Elmhurst Heights was like living in a military academy where the only acceptable outcome was conventional success. My father Robert had this obsession with what he called building character through discipline, which basically meant that everything I did was scrutinized, measured, and usually found lacking. My mother Patricia was quieter, but equally rigid in her expectations. Together they created this environment where love felt completely conditional on meeting their very specific definition of success. From the time I could walk, they had my entire life mapped out. I was supposed to excel in school, get into a prestigious university, graduate with a degree in something practical, like accounting or engineering, marry someone from a good family, and settle down into the same kind of predictable, stable life they had built. Any deviation from this plan was seen as a personal failure and a reflection of their parenting. When I was 7 years old, I won first place in the district science fair for a project about solar energy. I was so excited to show them my blue ribbon and the little trophy I'd earned. Instead of celebrating, my dad looked at my project and said, "This is nice, but you know this kind of thing won't help you get a real job someday. You should focus more on your math homework." Even at 7, I remember feeling this crushing disappointment that my achievement wasn't good enough. This pattern continued throughout my childhood. When I made the honor roll, they'd ask why I wasn't valedictorian. When I got into the advanced placement classes, they'd wonder why I wasn't taking even more challenging courses. When I scored in the 95th percentile on standardized tests, they'd focus on the 5% I missed rather than the 95% I got right. The worst part was how they talked about other families in our neighborhood. The Henderson's daughter became a nurse. Now that's a stable career with good benefits. The Kowalskis' son got a job at the local bank right after college. Smart boy, he understands the value of security. Meanwhile, anything creative or entrepreneurial was dismissed as frivolous or risky. When our neighbor Mrs. Delancey started a successful catering business, my mother would shake her head and say, "It's all fine until the economy turns and nobody wants to pay for fancy food anymore." By the time I reached high school, I had internalized this voice so completely that I was terrified to take any risks or pursue anything that might disappoint them. I took all the safe classes, joined academic clubs instead of anything creative, and started planning for a business degree even though my heart wasn't really in it. I was becoming exactly what they wanted, a risk-averse, conventional person who valued security above everything else. But there was this part of me that kept rebelling in small ways. I'd read entrepreneurship books in secret, hidden under my bed like they were contraband. I'd watch documentaries about people who built companies from nothing, and I'd feel this excitement and longing that I couldn't share with anyone. I had all these ideas for businesses I wanted to start, problems I wanted to solve, but I learned early on not to bring these up at the dinner table. The first major crack in our relationship happened during my junior year of high school. I had developed a business plan for a tutoring service that would connect struggling students with high-achieving peers. I thought it was brilliant. It would help students who were falling behind while giving academically successful kids a way to earn money. I was so proud of this idea that I finally worked up the courage to share it with my parents. My father's response was immediate and brutal. "This is exactly the kind of foolish thinking that leads to failure. You're in high school. Your job is to focus on your grades so you can get into a good college, not waste time on these fantasy business ideas. Successful people don't chase pipe dreams. They build careers through hard work and discipline." My mother nodded along and added, "Honey, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. These kinds of ventures almost always fail, and then where would you be? Focus on getting good grades and a stable degree. That's how you build a real future." That conversation taught me to stop sharing my dreams with them entirely. I learned to give them the answers they wanted to hear while quietly nurturing my entrepreneurial ambitions in private. I became really good at living a double life, the obedient daughter who was following their prescribed path on the surface, and the secret entrepreneur who was planning her escape underneath. College was supposed to be my chance to finally pursue my real interests, but even there, their influence followed me. They insisted on paying my tuition, which came with strings attached. I had to major in business administration from their approved list of practical degree programs. I had to call them every Sunday with updates on my grades. I had to send them copies of my transcripts each semester. The financial support came with a complete loss of autonomy. During my sophomore year, I started taking some elective courses in entrepreneurship and innovation, and I fell in love with the material. My professors were encouraging, my ideas were getting positive feedback, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in my element. But when my parents saw these courses on my transcript, they were furious. "We're not paying $40,000 a year for you to take fantasy classes," my father said during one of our Sunday calls. "If you want to keep getting our support, you'll drop these electives and focus on accounting and finance courses that will actually help you get hired after graduation." The final breaking point came during my junior year when I told them I wanted to switch my major to entrepreneurial studies. The program was designed for students who wanted to start their own businesses, and it included real-world experience working with startups and developing business plans. It was everything I had ever wanted to study. Their reaction was swift and absolute. They threatened to cut off all financial support if I switched majors. "We didn't sacrifice for 20 years to watch you throw your future away on some entrepreneurship fantasy," my mother said. "You'll graduate with a business administration degree that can get you a real job, or you'll figure out how to pay for college yourself." I caved. I stayed in the business administration program, took the courses they approved of, and graduated with a degree that felt completely meaningless to me. But by then, the damage to our relationship was irreversible. They had made it clear that their love and support were entirely conditional on my compliance with their vision of success. Any authenticity, any pursuit of my genuine interests, any deviation from their plan was seen as a betrayal worthy of abandonment. Looking back now, I realize they were parenting from a place of fear. They had built their entire sense of security around conventional employment and predictable outcomes. The idea that their daughter might choose uncertainty and risk over stability was genuinely terrifying to them. But instead of trying to understand my dreams or finding ways to support my ambitions while addressing their concerns, they chose control and ultimatums. That pattern of conditional love and rigid expectations had shaped every aspect of how I saw myself. By the time I graduated college, I was 21 years old and had never made a single major life decision based on what I actually wanted, rather than what would make them proud. I was a stranger to myself, living someone else's definition of success, and I was miserable. But I was about to change all of that, and it was going to cost me everything I thought I couldn't live without. After graduating with that business administration degree that felt like a prison sentence, I moved back to Elmhurst Heights temporarily while I figured out my next steps. My parents were thrilled. They saw this as confirmation that I was finally ready to embrace their vision of a sensible, conventional life. They had already started making plans for my future, suggesting I apply to local accounting firms and insurance companies where I could build a solid foundation for my career. But something had shifted in me during those final months of college. Maybe it was turning 21 and feeling like I was officially an adult. Or maybe it was the crushing realization that I had spent 4 years studying something I had zero passion for. Either way, I knew I couldn't keep living their version of my life. I just hadn't figured out how to break free yet. The opportunity came from an unexpected source. My college roommate Alexis had moved to Millbrook after graduation to work for a small marketing startup called Bridgepoint Communications. The company was growing rapidly, and they needed someone to help with business development and client relations. The position wasn't glamorous. It was basically a glorified assistant role with a fancy title. But Alexis convinced me it could be a stepping stone to something bigger. More importantly, it was in Millbrook, which was 2 hours away from Elmhurst Heights. Far enough to have my own life, but close enough that my parents wouldn't completely freak out about me moving to a different city. I pitched it to them as a practical opportunity to gain real-world business experience, while I continued looking for more permanent positions closer to home. They weren't thrilled about me moving away, but they approved of the company. Bridgepoint had been around for 8 years and had a solid reputation in the region. My father even knew someone who had worked there briefly and spoke well of their professional environment and growth potential. After weeks of discussions and negotiations, they agreed to let me take the position for 6 months to, quote, get some experience under my belt. I moved to Millbrook in September, 3 months after graduation, and rented a tiny studio apartment in the Riverside district. It was barely 400 square feet, with a kitchenette that consisted of a mini fridge, a hot plate, and about 2 feet of counter space. The bathroom was so small I could literally sit on the toilet and brush my teeth at the sink simultaneously. But it was mine, and for the first time in my life I was living completely independently. Bridgepoint Communications turned out to be everything I didn't know I was looking for. The company was founded by 2 former corporate executives, Daniel Morrison and Leslie Chang, who had left their high-paying jobs to build something more creative and flexible. They specialized in helping small businesses develop their brand identity and marketing strategies, which meant every client was different and every project was a new challenge. My official title was Business Development Associate, but in a company of 12 people, everyone wore multiple hats. I found myself doing everything from researching potential clients to helping design marketing materials to sitting in on strategy sessions with major accounts. It was chaotic and demanding, but I loved every minute of it. What made Bridgepoint special wasn't just the work, it was the culture. Daniel and Leslie had created an environment where creativity was valued over conformity, where taking calculated risks was encouraged, and where everyone's ideas were heard, regardless of their position in the hierarchy. During my second week, I suggested a new approach for reaching small business owners through local networking events, and instead of dismissing it because I was the newest employee, they asked me to develop a full proposal. I threw myself into that proposal like my life depended on it. I researched every networking organization in the region, analyzed their membership demographics, calculated potential ROI for different engagement strategies, and presented a comprehensive plan for expanding our client base through grassroots relationship building. When I finished presenting to the team, Daniel looked at me and said, "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. When can you start implementing it?" For the first time in my professional life, I felt valued for my ideas, rather than just my ability to follow instructions. I started attending networking events on behalf of the company, meeting small business owners who were struggling with marketing challenges, and connecting them with our services. Within 3 months, I had brought in 4 new clients and generated over $60,000 in new revenue. My parents were cautiously optimistic about my progress when I called them with updates. They liked hearing about the steady paycheck and professional development opportunities, and they seemed impressed when I told them about the clients I was bringing in. But I could tell they were still waiting for me to come to my senses and pursue something more traditional. The real turning point came during my 5th month at Bridgepoint, when Leslie approached me about a special project. One of their longtime clients, a family-owned restaurant chain called Harvest Kitchen, was struggling with declining sales and needed a complete brand overhaul. It was their biggest account, worth over $200,000 annually, and they were considering hiring a major advertising agency to handle the project. Leslie asked if I wanted to lead the account review and develop a counterproposal to keep the business in-house. It was a huge opportunity and an even bigger risk. If I failed, Bridgepoint could lose their most valuable client. If I succeeded, it would prove I could handle major accounts and strategic planning at the highest level. I said yes immediately, even though I was terrified. I spent the next 2 weeks living and breathing Harvest Kitchen. I visited all 7 of their locations, interviewed customers, analyzed their competition, studied industry trends, and developed what I believed was a comprehensive strategy for revitalizing their brand and increasing their market share. The presentation was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in early February. The Harvest Kitchen executives, along with Daniel and Leslie, gathered in our small conference room while I presented my vision for their company's future. I had prepared for weeks, anticipated every possible question, and rehearsed my talking points until I could deliver them in my sleep. But when I stood up to begin the presentation, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling nervous or overwhelmed, I felt completely in my element. This was what I was meant to be doing: analyzing business challenges, developing creative solutions, and persuading people to take action. For 45 minutes, I presented with a confidence and passion I had never experienced before. When I finished, the room was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then the CEO of Harvest Kitchen, a 60-year-old man named Vincent Delacroix, started asking detailed questions about implementation timelines, budget requirements, and success metrics. I answered every question confidently, referencing specific data points and industry benchmarks I had researched. At the end of the meeting, Vincent shook my hand and said, "Young lady, that was the most impressive business presentation I've seen in 20 years. If you can deliver on even half of what you've promised, you're going to go very far in this industry." Harvest Kitchen signed a 3-year contract extension that afternoon, worth over $700,000 total. Daniel and Leslie were ecstatic, and they immediately promoted me to Senior Business Development Specialist with a significant raise and profit-sharing opportunities. When I called my parents that night to share the news, they were genuinely proud for the first time I could remember. My father said, "Now this is the kind of success we knew you were capable of. You're building real skills and proving yourself in a professional environment." For a brief moment, I thought maybe we could finally find common ground. Maybe they could accept that I was succeeding in my own way, even if it wasn't exactly the path they had envisioned for me. I was making good money, earning recognition from clients and colleagues, and developing expertise in a legitimate business field. But that harmony was about to be shattered completely, because I was about to make a decision that would force them to choose between supporting my dreams and maintaining their rigid definition of acceptable success. For about 8 months after the Harvest Kitchen success, everything felt perfect in a way I had never experienced before. My parents were finally proud of me, my career was taking off, and I felt like I had found the sweet spot between following my entrepreneurial instincts and maintaining their approval. It was like I had discovered the magic formula for keeping everyone happy, while still pursuing meaningful work. My relationship with my parents transformed almost overnight. Suddenly, I was the daughter they bragged about to their friends and neighbors. When I visited them on weekends, my father would pull out his phone and show people photos of me at company events, talking about our daughter, who's making quite a name for herself in the business world. My mother started calling me twice a week just to chat about my work projects and ask for updates on my latest client wins. They even started including me in their social circle in ways they never had before. When the Elmhurst Heights Community Association held their annual fundraising dinner, they invited me as their guest and introduced me to everyone as their successful businesswoman daughter. Mrs. Henderson, whose nurse daughter they had praised for years, actually complimented them on raising such an ambitious young woman. I watched my parents beam with pride, and for the first time in my life I felt like I was finally good enough. At Bridgepoint, I was riding an incredible wave of success. After the Harvest Kitchen victory, Daniel and Leslie started giving me more responsibility and autonomy. They created a new position for me, Director of Strategic Accounts, and gave me my own small team to manage. I was essentially running my own mini division within the company, focused on landing and managing high-value clients. The work was exactly what I had always dreamed of doing. I was identifying struggling businesses, analyzing their challenges, developing comprehensive solutions, and then implementing strategies that actually transformed their bottom lines. It felt like entrepreneurship within the safety net of an established company, and I was thriving in ways that surprised even me. My success started attracting attention beyond Bridgepoint. I was invited to speak at the Regional Small Business Development Conference about innovative marketing strategies for local companies. The Millbrook Chamber of Commerce asked me to serve on their Emerging Professionals Board. A local business magazine featured me in an article about young leaders shaping the Valley's economic future. Every achievement felt like validation that I had finally found my path. I was building a reputation, making real money, and solving complex business problems, all while maintaining my parents' approval. It seemed like I had managed to thread the needle between entrepreneurial success and conventional respectability. During this period, my parents and I developed a routine that felt wonderfully normal for the first time in our relationship. I would drive home to Elmhurst Heights every other weekend, and we would have these long dinners where I would tell them about my latest projects, and they would share updates about their work and their friends. They were genuinely interested in my career, asking thoughtful questions about client challenges and celebrating my wins. My father even started giving me business advice, drawing on his decades of experience in manufacturing to help me understand different industry dynamics. He would say things like, "What you're doing with these struggling restaurants reminds me of the turnaround we did at the plant in 1998, and then share insights that actually proved useful in my work. For the first time, I felt like we were connecting as professional equals, rather than disappointed parent and rebellious child. My mother started sending me care packages with homemade cookies and notes, saying things like, "Thought you might need some comfort food during your busy week. We're so proud of how hard you're working. She even bought me a professional briefcase for my birthday, a beautiful leather portfolio that she said would help me look the part of the successful businesswoman you've become. The false harmony extended to our family gatherings as well. During holiday dinners, instead of the usual lectures about responsibility and practical career choices, my parents would ask me to share stories about my work with our extended family. Aunt Ruth, who had always been skeptical of my unconventional tendencies, started asking me for business advice about her husband's struggling auto repair shop. Uncle Ted, who owned a small construction company, wanted to know if I thought Bridgepoint could help him expand into new markets. I felt like I had finally earned my place in the family as someone whose opinion mattered and whose achievements were worth celebrating. After years of feeling like the family disappointment, I was suddenly the success story they pointed to with pride. But what I didn't realize at the time was that their approval was entirely dependent on me staying within very specific boundaries. They were proud of me because they saw my work at Bridgepoint as a stepping stone to the kind of conventional corporate career they had always wanted for me. In their minds, I was finally getting serious about building a traditional professional trajectory. My father would often talk about how my experience at Bridgepoint was giving me valuable skills that would help me land a position at a major corporation. "You're learning so much about business development and client management," he would say. "In a few years, you'll be ready to move to a Fortune 500 company where you can really build a career with security and benefits." My mother would add comments like, "And once you're established at a big company, you'll be in a perfect position to meet a nice professional man and start thinking about settling down. This is exactly the foundation we hoped you would build." They saw my success at Bridgepoint as confirmation that their approach to life was correct. Work hard, follow conventional paths, build incrementally toward security and stability. They had no idea that every day I spent in the business world was actually feeding my entrepreneurial ambitions and giving me ideas for ventures I wanted to pursue on my own. During client meetings, I would find myself thinking about how I would handle their challenges differently if I were running my own consultancy. When I saw inefficiencies in Bridgepoint's operations, I would imagine how I would structure things if I were building a company from scratch. When I attended networking events and met other business owners, I would feel this growing excitement about the possibility of joining their ranks as an entrepreneur rather than an employee. But I kept these thoughts to myself because I was terrified of disrupting the harmony I had finally achieved with my parents. For the first time in my life, they were proud of me, and I was addicted to that feeling. I convinced myself that maybe I could be satisfied with this level of entrepreneurial engagement within someone else's company. Maybe I didn't need to take the risk of starting my own business if I could find fulfillment and recognition in a more traditional setting. I was living in a beautiful bubble where everyone was happy and everything seemed to be working perfectly. My parents were proud, my career was flourishing, and I felt like I had finally figured out how to be successful in a way that satisfied both my ambitions and their expectations. What I didn't understand was that this harmony was completely dependent on me never pushing beyond the boundaries they had set for what constituted acceptable success. The moment I started talking about taking real entrepreneurial risks or pursuing ventures that prioritized growth over security, this whole perfect dynamic would shatter completely. And that moment was coming sooner than any of us expected, because my success at Bridgepoint was about to present me with an opportunity that would force me to choose between playing it safe and pursuing my real dreams. The opportunity that would destroy my perfect world came from an unexpected source, one of my own clients. During my second year at Bridgepoint, I had been working with a struggling tech startup called Novatech Solutions. They specialized in developing custom software for small businesses, but they were hemorrhaging money and on the verge of bankruptcy when they came to us for help. The company was founded by two brilliant programmers, Jake Hendrickson and Maria Santos, who could build incredible software but had absolutely no idea how to run a business. They had amazing technical skills, but zero understanding of marketing, sales, customer relations, or financial management. Their product was revolutionary, a customizable inventory management system that could integrate with any existing business software, but they couldn't figure out how to reach their target market or price their services profitably. I spent 6 months working with Novatech, developing their brand strategy, restructuring their pricing model, creating their sales processes, and building relationships with potential clients. It was the most challenging project I had ever taken on, but also the most rewarding. Watching their company transform from a chaotic startup into an organized, profitable business felt like witnessing a miracle. By the end of our engagement, Novatech had increased their revenue by 340% and had a waiting list of clients wanting their services. Jake and Maria went from barely being able to pay their rent to considering expansion into 3 new markets. They were so grateful for the transformation that they offered Bridgepoint a permanent retainer to continue providing strategic guidance as they grew. But during our final strategy session in March, Jake and Maria approached me with a proposition that would change everything. They had been thinking about the future of their company and realized they needed someone with my specific skill set to join them permanently as a partner. Not as a consultant, not as an employee, but as a co-founder who would handle all the business development, marketing, and strategic planning while they focused on product development. "We've watched you work for 6 months," Maria explained, "and you don't just understand business strategy. You have an intuitive sense for how to build companies from the ground up. You see opportunities we miss, you solve problems we didn't even know we had, and you have this ability to connect with clients that we could never replicate." Jake nodded enthusiastically. "We want to offer you a full partnership, equal ownership, equal decision-making authority, and a share of all future profits. We're projecting that if we execute the growth plan you helped us develop, this company could be worth $10 million within 5 years." The offer was incredible. They were offering me 33% ownership of a company that was already profitable and growing rapidly. Based on their current trajectory, my stake could be worth over $3 million by the time I turned 30. It was the kind of opportunity that most people only dream about. But there was one catch. I would have to leave Bridgepoint and give up the security of my current position to join a startup that, despite its recent success, was still inherently risky. There were no guarantees that Novatech would continue growing, no safety net if the partnership didn't work out, and no way to predict how the market would respond to their expansion plans. I asked for 2 weeks to consider their offer, and those were the longest 2 weeks of my life. Every instinct I had was screaming that this was exactly the opportunity I had been waiting for. This was my chance to be an actual entrepreneur, to build something from the ground up, to take the kind of risks that could lead to extraordinary success. But I was also terrified of what my parents would say. Our relationship had finally reached a place where they were proud of me and supportive of my career. I had a stable job with a growing company, a steady income, and a clear path for advancement within the traditional corporate structure they valued. Walking away from all of that to join a startup would feel like a betrayal of everything they had taught me about building a secure future. I spent hours researching everything I could about Novatech's market position, their competition, and the potential risks involved in joining them. I analyzed their financial statements, studied industry trends, and even hired an independent consultant to evaluate their business model. Every piece of data suggested that this was a sound business opportunity with enormous upside potential. I also knew that this was likely a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Companies like Novatech, with strong products and proven growth trajectories, don't usually offer partnerships to outsiders. Jake and Maria were essentially inviting me to skip the entire startup phase and join them as they scaled into a major player in their industry. The more I researched and analyzed, the more convinced I became that this was exactly the kind of opportunity I had been preparing for my entire career. All of my experience at Bridgepoint, all of the skills I had developed working with struggling businesses, all of the relationships I had built in the local business community, everything had been leading to this moment. But when I tried to imagine explaining this decision to my parents, I felt sick to my stomach. I could already hear my father's voice. "You're going to throw away a secure position with an established company to gamble on some startup? After everything we've taught you about the importance of stability and security?" I could see my mother's disappointed expression as she asked, "Why can't you just be satisfied with the success you've already achieved? You have a good job, you're making good money, you're building a solid reputation. Why do you always have to take these unnecessary risks?" The internal conflict was eating me alive. I knew that accepting the Novatech partnership was the right decision for my career and my long-term goals. I also knew that it would likely destroy the harmony I had finally achieved with my parents, and potentially damage our relationship permanently. I tried to find compromises and middle ground solutions. Maybe I could negotiate a part-time partnership with Novatech while maintaining my position at Bridgepoint. Maybe I could convince my parents that this was actually a smart career move that would accelerate my professional growth. Maybe I could frame it as a temporary opportunity that would give me valuable experience before returning to more traditional employment. But deep down, I knew there were no compromises that would work. Novatech needed a full-time partner who was completely committed to their growth. My parents would never understand or support a decision to leave stable employment for startup equity. This was an all-or-nothing moment that would force me to choose between my authentic ambitions and my family's approval. I scheduled a dinner with my parents for the weekend before my deadline to respond to Novatech's offer. I still hadn't decided what I was going to do, but I knew I needed to at least try to explain the opportunity to them and see if there was any chance they could support my decision. That conversation would determine not just the direction of my career, but the future of my relationship with the two people whose approval I had spent my entire life trying to earn. I was about to discover whether their love for me was strong enough to survive my pursuit of dreams they couldn't understand. The dinner at my parents' house that Saturday evening started normally enough. My mother had made my favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, and my father was in a good mood, telling me about a process improvement project he was leading at Thornfield Industries. For the first hour, we chatted about work, local news, and family friends, just like we had been doing for the past 8 months. But as we moved to dessert, I knew I couldn't put off the conversation any longer. My hands were literally shaking as I set down my coffee cup and cleared my throat to get their attention. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about something important. I've been offered an incredible opportunity and I want to share it with you and get your thoughts." My father immediately perked up, assuming this was going to be good news about a promotion or a job offer from a larger company. "Oh, that's wonderful, sweetheart. What kind of opportunity?" I took a deep breath and launched into my carefully prepared explanation. I told them about Novatech, about the transformation I had helped orchestrate, about Jake and Maria's partnership offer, and about the potential for building something extraordinary from the ground up. I had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times, anticipating their concerns and preparing responses that would address their fears, while helping them understand the magnitude of the opportunity. But I could see their expressions changing before I was even halfway through my explanation. My mother's face went from interested to concerned to genuinely alarmed. My father's initial enthusiasm faded into something that looked like disappointment and frustration. When I finished explaining the partnership offer and the potential financial upside, the room was completely silent for what felt like an eternity. Then my father set down his coffee cup with a sharp clink and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in months. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said, his voice taking on that cold, controlled tone I remembered from my childhood. "You want to quit your stable job at an established company to join some startup that could fail at any moment, giving up a guaranteed salary and benefits for some vague promise of future profits that may never materialize." I tried to explain that Novatech wasn't just some startup, that they were already profitable, had a proven product, and were experiencing rapid growth. I showed them the research I had done, the financial projections, the market analysis that suggested this was a sound business opportunity. But my father waved away all of my documentation. "I don't care how much research you've done or how promising this company looks on paper. Startups fail every day, and when they do, you'll be left with nothing. No job, no income, no way to support yourself. We didn't sacrifice for 25 years so you could throw away your security on some entrepreneurial fantasy." My mother jumped in with what I thought might be a more sympathetic perspective. Honey, we're not saying this company isn't promising. We're just worried that you're making an emotional decision instead of a practical one. You have such a good thing going at Bridgepoint. You're respected, you're successful, you're building a solid foundation for your future. Why would you want to risk all of that? I tried to explain that this wasn't an emotional decision, that I had spent weeks analyzing every aspect of the opportunity, that I had consulted with business advisors, that every piece of data suggested this was exactly the kind of calculated risk that could accelerate my career by years. But that's just it, my father interrupted. You shouldn't be taking any risks at all. You're 23 years old. This is the time in your life when you should be focused on building stability and security, not chasing these get-rich-quick schemes. This isn't a get-rich-quick scheme, I protested. This is a legitimate business opportunity with people I trust, and a product that's already proven successful in the market. Trust? My mother laughed, but there was no humor in it. You've known these people for 6 months. How can you possibly trust them enough to bet your entire future on their promises? What happens when their friendship with you doesn't survive the stress of running a business together? What happens when you disagree about major decisions? What happens when the market changes and their product is no longer in demand? I had answers for all of these questions. Partnership agreements, clearly defined roles and responsibilities, market research showing long-term demand for their services. But every response I gave seemed to make them more frustrated rather than more reassured. The conversation continued for over an hour, becoming increasingly heated as they raised objection after objection to the partnership opportunity. They questioned my judgment, my maturity, my understanding of business risks, and my commitment to building a real career. Every concern they raised felt like a personal attack on my competence and my dreams. Finally, my father delivered what felt like the killing blow. You know what this sounds like to me? This sounds exactly like the same kind of impractical thinking that got you into trouble in college. You're so desperate to prove that you're some kind of entrepreneurial genius that you're willing to sabotage your own success. I'm not sabotaging anything, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I'm trying to take advantage of an opportunity that could change my entire life for the better. Change your life for the better? My mother shook her head sadly. Sweetheart, your life is already good. You have a stable job, a growing reputation, a clear path forward. Why can't you just be grateful for what you've accomplished instead of always reaching for something more? That question hit me like a physical blow. After everything I had achieved, after proving myself in the business world, after finally earning their approval and respect, they still saw my ambitions as greed rather than drive. They still believed that wanting more than security and stability was somehow selfish or unrealistic. I tried one more time to help them understand. This isn't about being grateful or ungrateful. This is about recognizing when life presents you with an extraordinary opportunity and having the courage to pursue it. Jake and Maria are offering me a chance to build something that could impact thousands of businesses and create hundreds of jobs. How is that not worthwhile? But my father was already shaking his head. Impact, jobs, changing the world. These are the same fantasy arguments you used to make in college. The reality is that you're talking about gambling with your future for promises that probably won't come true. Then came the ultimatum that shattered everything. My mother looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "If you take this partnership, you're on your own. We won't be here to pick up the pieces when it falls apart, and we won't pretend to support a decision we know is wrong." My father nodded grimly. "We've supported you through college, we've celebrated your success at Bridgepoint, and we've been proud of the progress you've made building a real career. But if you choose to throw all of that away for some startup fantasy, then you're choosing to do it without our support or approval." I sat there staring at them, trying to process what they had just said. They were essentially telling me that their love and support were conditional on my willingness to stay within their definition of acceptable risk. If I pursued my actual dreams and ambitions, I would be doing it alone. "So that's it?" I asked quietly. Either I give up this opportunity and stay exactly where you want me to stay, or I lose my family." "You're not losing your family," my mother said, but her voice was cold. "You're choosing your priorities. And if your priority is some business gamble over the security and stability we've taught you to value, then you're making that choice yourself." I looked at both of them sitting there, united in their opposition to everything I actually wanted for my life, and something inside me finally broke. After 23 years of trying to earn their approval, after finally achieving the success they claimed to want for me, I realized that it would never be enough unless it was exactly the kind of success they could understand and control. I stood up from the table, gathered my purse and jacket, and headed toward the door. "I guess I have my answer then," I said. "I'm taking the partnership." As I reached the door, my father called after me. "Don't come crying to us when this all falls apart. You're making this choice against our advice and against our wishes. Whatever happens next is on you." I drove back to Millbrook that night with tears streaming down my face, but also with a strange sense of clarity I had never experienced before. For the first time in my life, I was going to make a decision based on what I believed was right for my future, rather than what would make my parents proud. The next morning, I called Jake and Maria and accepted their partnership offer. 3 weeks later, I submitted my resignation to Bridgepoint and prepared to embark on the most terrifying and exhilarating chapter of my life. I had finally chosen my dreams over their approval, but the cost was higher than I had ever imagined it would be. The weeks following my decision to join Novatech were a whirlwind of activity, but also a period of profound personal transformation. For the first time in my life, I was operating without the safety net of my parents' approval, and while it was terrifying, it was also incredibly liberating. I was finally free to make decisions based purely on what I believed was best for my future, rather than what would keep them happy. Jake, Maria, and I spent countless hours developing our partnership structure and planning our expansion strategy. We decided to rebrand the company as Quantum Business Solutions, to better reflect our evolution from a simple software developer to a comprehensive business transformation consultancy. The name change felt symbolic of my own transformation. I was no longer just someone helping other people's companies succeed. I was now a co-founder building something entirely new. But the real awakening came about 6 weeks after I joined the partnership, when my parents made their first attempt to sabotage my new venture. I had been so focused on launching Quantum that I hadn't been paying attention to what was happening back in Elmhurst Heights. But apparently, they had been busy spreading their version of events to anyone who would listen. The first sign of trouble came when Vincent Delacroix from Harvest Kitchen called me unexpectedly on a Tuesday afternoon. Vincent had become something of a mentor figure during my time at Bridgepoint, and I had maintained a friendly relationship with him even after leaving the company. "I need to ask you about something," Vincent said without his usual pleasantries. "I've been hearing some concerning things about your new business venture, and I wanted to get your side of the story before I made any decisions about our ongoing relationship." My stomach dropped. "What kind of concerning things?" "Well, your parents have been telling people around town that you've gotten involved with some kind of questionable startup operation. They're saying that you left a perfectly good job to join what they're calling a, quote, fly-by-night scam run by people who are taking advantage of your inexperience." I was speechless. My own parents were actively trying to damage my reputation and undermine my new business before it even had a chance to succeed. This wasn't just disapproval or concern. This was deliberate sabotage. Vincent continued, "They seem to think this company is some kind of pyramid scheme or get-rich-quick operation, and they're worried that you're going to lose everything and drag other people down with you. Robert even suggested that I might want to reconsider working with you on future projects." The betrayal was so complete and unexpected that I literally had to sit down. They weren't content to simply withdraw their support. They were actively working to destroy the opportunity I had chosen over their approval. They were willing to damage my professional reputation and potentially ruin my future, just to prove that they had been right about the risks of entrepreneurship. But instead of crushing me, their sabotage attempt had the opposite effect. Something inside me snapped. And for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely angry at my parents rather than just disappointed or hurt. This wasn't protective concern. This was vindictive retaliation designed to force me back into compliance with their vision of my life. I spent the rest of that day calling every professional contact I could think of, proactively addressing the rumors my parents had been spreading. I explained the real situation with Quantum, shared our business plan and financial projections, and invited anyone with concerns to meet with Jake, Maria, and me directly to evaluate our operation firsthand. But more importantly, I finally understood that I needed to stop trying to manage their emotions and expectations. For 23 years, I had been editing my dreams and ambitions to fit within their comfort zone, and it had never been enough. No matter how successful I became within their parameters, they would always find new ways to control and limit my choices. That evening, I sat down and wrote them a letter that I should have written years earlier. I didn't mail it immediately. I let it sit for 3 days while I made sure I was saying exactly what I needed to say without letting emotion override my message. The letter was 4 pages long, and it laid out everything I had never been brave enough to tell them directly. I explained that their conditional support had shaped my entire relationship with success and failure. I told them that their attempts to sabotage my new venture had crossed a line from protective concern into deliberate harm. Most importantly, I made it clear that I was done seeking their approval for my life choices. For my entire life, I wrote, I have been trying to earn your love by becoming the person you wanted me to be rather than the person I actually am. I have sacrificed my authentic interests, my natural instincts, and my genuine ambitions in order to maintain your approval. But your recent actions have made it clear that your love was never really about what was best for me. It was about your need to control my choices and validate your own approach to life. I continued, I am not asking you to understand or support my decision to become an entrepreneur. I am simply informing you that I will no longer be seeking your permission to pursue my dreams or apologizing for choosing opportunities that don't fit within your definition of acceptable risk. You raised me to be independent, intelligent, and capable of making my own decisions. I am now doing exactly that. The most difficult part of the letter was the section where I addressed their sabotage directly. Your attempts to undermine my professional reputation and damage my business relationships are not the actions of concerned parents. They are the actions of people who would rather see me fail than succeed in ways they cannot control. If you cannot support my choices, that is your right. But actively working to destroy my opportunities is unacceptable, and it needs to stop immediately. I ended the letter with a clear boundary that I had never been strong enough to establish before. I love you both, and I hope that someday we can have a relationship based on mutual respect rather than conditional approval. But until you can accept that I am an adult capable of making my own decisions, even decisions you disagree with, I will not be subjecting myself to your criticism, ultimatums, or sabotage attempts. When you are ready to treat me as an equal rather than a child who needs to be controlled, I will be here. Until then, I need space to build my life according to my own values and priorities. I mailed the letter on a Friday morning, and I felt this incredible sense of relief as I dropped it in the mailbox. For the first time in my life, I had spoken my complete truth to them without worrying about how they would react or what consequences I might face for being honest about my feelings. 3 days later, my father called me. I almost didn't answer, but I decided I needed to hear what they had to say in response to my letter. We received your letter, he said, without any greeting or pleasantries. Your mother and I have discussed it, and we think you've been influenced by these business partners of yours to turn against your own family. We're disappointed that you would choose to believe outsiders over the people who have loved and supported you your entire life. I took a deep breath before responding. Dad, this isn't about choosing outsiders over family. This is about choosing to live authentically, rather than spending my entire life trying to earn approval that will always be conditional on my willingness to suppress who I really am. That's nonsense, he replied. We've always supported you when you made sensible decisions. We celebrated your success. At Bridgepoint, we were proud of your achievements. We included you in our lives. We only withdrew our support when you chose to make a reckless decision that we knew would hurt you. And that's exactly the problem, I said, feeling calmer and more confident than I had ever felt in a conversation with him. Your support has always been conditional on my choices meeting your approval. That's not love. That's control. And I'm done living my life according to your definition of what's sensible or reckless. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but it became clear that they were completely unwilling to acknowledge that their behavior had been controlling or harmful. They genuinely believed that their attempts to sabotage my business were justified because they knew better than I did about what was good for my future. When I finally hung up the phone, I felt this profound sense of closure. I had said everything I needed to say, I had established the boundaries I needed to protect myself, and I had finally stopped trying to manage their emotions or earn their approval. From that moment forward, I was completely on my own, but for the first time in my life, I was also completely free to become whoever I was meant to be. My parents' response to my letter and boundary setting was swift, calculated, and far more vicious than I had anticipated. If I thought their initial sabotage attempts were bad, I was completely unprepared for the full-scale war they were about to wage against my new life and business. The escalation began 2 weeks after our phone conversation, when I received a call from my landlord, Mrs. Chen, who owned the small office space where Quantum Business Solutions was headquartered. She sounded uncomfortable and apologetic as she explained that she had received several anonymous complaints about our business operations. "I'm sure it's nothing," she said carefully, "but I've had people calling to say that your company might be involved in some kind of fraudulent activities. They're suggesting that you're running some sort of scheme to take advantage of small business owners." My blood ran cold. What kind of people have been calling? Well, they wouldn't give their names, but they claimed to be concerned community members who had heard troubling things about your business practices. They said I should investigate whether you have proper licensing and insurance, and they suggested that I might be liable if anything illegal is happening in my building. I assured Mrs. Chen that we had all the proper documentation and invited her to review our business licenses, insurance policies, and client contracts personally. She was satisfied after our meeting, but the damage was done. I now knew that my parents were escalating their campaign beyond just spreading rumors to actively trying to interfere with our basic business operations. The attacks intensified over the following weeks. Jake received a call from his bank asking about irregularities in his business account after someone had contacted them with concerns about potential money laundering. Maria's credit score was mysteriously flagged for review after anonymous reports suggested she might be involved in financial fraud. I started getting calls from potential clients who had heard concerning things about our company from unspecified sources. But the most devastating blow came when I discovered that my parents had contacted several of our existing clients directly. I found out when Jennifer Walsh, the owner of a small restaurant chain we had been helping with their expansion strategy, called to cancel our contract unexpectedly. "I'm really sorry," Jennifer said, and she genuinely sounded apologetic. "I've been getting calls from people who claim to know you personally, and they're saying some pretty alarming things about your company and your background." I felt like I was going to be sick. "What kind of things?" "They're saying that you have a history of unstable behavior, that you quit your last job without notice after some kind of breakdown, and that you've convinced these programmers to let you into their company even though you don't have any real technical skills or business experience." The lies were so twisted and specific that I knew exactly who was behind them. My parents had taken kernels of truth, that I had left Bridgepoint for a startup, that I wasn't a programmer myself, and spun them into a narrative designed to destroy my credibility and professional reputation. They also said, Jennifer continued reluctantly, that your own parents are so concerned about your mental state and business judgment that they're trying to warn people in the community about getting involved with you. That was the moment I realized the full scope of what they were doing. They weren't just disagreeing with my choice or expressing concern. They were systematically attempting to destroy every aspect of my new life. They were willing to lie about my mental health, fabricate stories about my professional behavior, and manipulate people I cared about. all to force me back into compliance with their vision of my future. I spent that entire night documenting every incident, every phone call, every attempt at sabotage I could verify. I contacted an attorney the next morning to discuss whether their behavior constituted harassment or defamation, and whether I had any legal recourse to make them stop. The lawyer, David Richmond, listened to my story with growing concern. "What your parents are doing goes far beyond normal family disagreement," he said. "This appears to be a coordinated campaign to damage your business and professional reputation. The fact that they're making false statements about your mental health and spreading lies about your business practices could constitute both defamation and intentional interference with business relationships." David helped me send a formal cease and desist letter to my parents, demanding that they stop contacting my clients, spreading false information about me or my business, and interfering with my professional relationships. The letter made it clear that continued harassment would result in legal action and potential damages for the harm they had caused to my reputation and business. But instead of backing down, they escalated even further. Within days of receiving the cease and desist letter, I discovered that my father had reached out to Daniel and Leslie at Bridgepoint, suggesting that they should warn other companies in the region about my erratic behavior and poor judgment. Daniel called me immediately after my father contacted him. "I have to tell you, this is one of the strangest conversations I've ever had," he said. "Your father spent 20 minutes trying to convince me that you're having some kind of mental breakdown and that I should spread the word in the business community that you're not reliable." "What did you tell him?" I asked, dreading the answer. "I told him that you were one of the most competent and professional people I've ever worked with, and that if he was really concerned about your well-being, he should be supporting you rather than trying to sabotage your career. I also told him that if he contacted me again with this kind of nonsense, I'd be reporting him for harassment." Daniel's support meant everything to me, but I was devastated to realize that my parents were now actively trying to poison my professional relationships with people I had worked with for years. They were willing to damage not just my current business, but my entire future career prospects in the region. The final straw came when I learned that they had contacted my college career services office, claiming that I was using my degree fraudulently and suggesting that the school should investigate whether I had properly completed my graduation requirements. The career counselor who called me sounded embarrassed to even be making the inquiry, but explained that they had to follow up on all claims of academic fraud. "Obviously, this is ridiculous," she said after reviewing my transcripts and graduation records. "You clearly completed all requirements and graduated in good standing. But I have to ask, do you have any idea why someone would make these kinds of false claims about your academic record?" That night, I sat in my apartment trying to process the full scope of what my parents had done to me in just 6 weeks. They had attacked my business, my professional reputation, my academic credentials, my mental health, and my personal relationships with clients and colleagues. They had lied to landlords, banks, former employers, and educational institutions. They had tried to isolate me professionally and financially, apparently believing that if they could destroy my new life completely, I would have no choice but to return to them and accept their vision of my future. But their campaign of destruction had also clarified something important for me. This wasn't really about protecting me from a risky business decision. This was about punishing me for choosing independence over compliance. They were willing to destroy my entire life rather than accept that I was an adult, capable of making my own decisions, even decisions they disagreed with. I called Jake and Maria that evening and explained everything that had been happening. Instead of being angry or concerned about the damage to our business, they were furious on my behalf. "This is absolutely insane," Maria said. "I can't believe your own parents would try to destroy your life just because you didn't make the career choice they wanted." Jake was even more direct. "We need to document everything and consider filing criminal charges. What they're doing isn't just wrong, it's probably illegal." But I had a different idea. Instead of continuing to react defensively to their attacks, I decided it was time to show them, and everyone else, exactly what I was capable of achieving. If they wanted to try to destroy my reputation and my business, I would build something so successful and undeniable that their lies would become obviously ridiculous to anyone with eyes to see. It was time to stop defending myself and start proving them wrong in the most spectacular way possible. The systematic destruction my parents had orchestrated finally reached its breaking point 3 months after their campaign began, when everything I had worked to build came crashing down in a single devastating week that nearly destroyed my faith in entrepreneurship forever. It started on a Monday morning when Jake called me in a panic. "We have a problem," he said, his voice shaking. 3 of our biggest clients just terminated their contracts overnight. All of them cited the same concerns about our company's reliability and your professional background. I felt the blood drain from my face. Those 3 clients represented nearly 60% of our revenue. Losing them simultaneously would effectively cripple Quantum Business Solutions and potentially force us into bankruptcy within weeks. Did they give specific reasons? I asked, already knowing the answer would be painful. They all mentioned receiving calls from, quote, concerned community members who warned them about potential legal issues with our company. One of them specifically said they had been told that you were under investigation for business fraud and that working with us could expose them to liability. The lies had finally reached a critical mass. My parents had been so systematic and persistent in their sabotage campaign that they had managed to create a network of fear and suspicion around our company that was now self-perpetuating. People were calling other people, sharing rumors and concerns, and the misinformation was spreading faster than we could correct it. Tuesday brought even worse news. Maria discovered that someone had filed complaints against our company with the Better Business Bureau, the State Licensing Board, and the local Chamber of Commerce. The complaints alleged that we were operating without proper credentials, overcharging clients for substandard services, and using deceptive marketing practices to target vulnerable small business owners. Every allegation was false, but proving that would require time, documentation, and resources we didn't have, while simultaneously trying to salvage our remaining client relationships and keep the company operational. Wednesday was when I learned the full scope of their reach. My attorney, David Richmond, called with devastating news about the defamation case we had been building against my parents. "I have to be honest with you," he said carefully. "The situation has become more complicated than we initially anticipated. Your parents have been very strategic about how they've spread these rumors. They've been careful to frame most of their statements as, quote, concerns and, quote, questions, rather than direct accusations, which makes them harder to prosecute as defamation." He continued, "They've also been clever about using intermediaries and anonymous channels for many of their attacks. While we know they're behind this campaign, proving it legally is going to be much more difficult and expensive than we originally thought." David explained that pursuing the case could take years and cost tens of thousands of dollars, with no guarantee of success. Meanwhile, every day the rumors continued to spread was another day of damage to our reputation and business prospects. Thursday brought the news that shattered my last hope of salvaging the situation. Our office landlord, Mrs. Chen, called to inform me that she would not be renewing our lease when it expired at the end of the month. "I'm truly sorry," she said, and I could hear the genuine regret in her voice. "But I've been getting constant calls and complaints about your business for weeks now. Some of my other tenants are concerned about being associated with the building, and I just can't afford to lose multiple tenants over one lease." I begged her to reconsider, explaining that the complaints were part of a personal vendetta and offering to provide documentation proving our legitimacy. But she had already made up her mind. The harassment campaign had created too much stress and uncertainty for her to continue the relationship. By Friday, Jake and Maria sat me down for the conversation I had been dreading. Despite their loyalty and friendship, they couldn't ignore the financial reality of what was happening to our company. "We've lost 70% of our revenue in 1 week," Jake said gently. "Our remaining clients are nervous. We're facing multiple investigations that will cost money to resolve, and we're about to lose our office space. We need to seriously consider whether Quantum Business Solutions is still viable." Maria added, "We believe in you. and we know that none of this is your fault. But we also have to be realistic about whether we can survive this kind of sustained attack on our reputation. Maybe we need to shut down temporarily and regroup, or maybe we need to consider dissolving the partnership entirely. The words hit me like physical blows. Everything I had sacrificed my family relationships to build was collapsing, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. My parents' campaign had been so effective that even people who believed in my abilities were questioning whether working with me was worth the risk. That weekend, I spent 2 days alone in my apartment, trying to figure out what to do next. I had lost my business, my income, my professional reputation, and my family relationships. I was 24 years old with no job prospects, significant debt from legal fees and business expenses, and a personal reputation that was so damaged I wasn't sure I could ever rebuild it. The worst part wasn't the financial devastation, it was the realization that my parents had been willing to destroy my entire life rather than accept my independence. They had chosen to annihilate my dreams, my relationships, my career prospects, and my future, rather than simply disagree with my choices and let me succeed or fail on my own merits. I had given up everything to pursue my entrepreneurial ambitions, and I had lost it all not because I had failed as a business person, but because my own family had systematically sabotaged every aspect of my new life. The business model was sound, the partnerships were strong, the clients had been satisfied. None of that mattered when faced with a coordinated campaign of lies and harassment. For the first time since leaving home, I seriously considered whether my parents had been right all along. Maybe I wasn't cut out for entrepreneurship. Maybe I should have stayed at Bridgepoint, accepted their vision of my future, and avoided this entire catastrophe. Maybe the security and stability they valued really was more important than pursuing risky dreams that could be destroyed so easily. I spent Sunday nights staring at my phone, drafting and deleting text messages to my parents. Part of me wanted to call them and admit defeat, to tell them they had won and ask if there was any way to repair our relationship. I imagined how satisfying it would be for them to hear me acknowledge that they had been right about the risks of entrepreneurship and wrong to reject their advice. But every time I started to type those words, I remembered the conversation with my father where he had threatened to cut me off if I took the partnership. I remembered my mother's cold voice telling me I was choosing my priorities over family. I remembered the systematic cruelty of their sabotage campaign and their willingness to lie about my mental health and professional competence. They hadn't been trying to protect me from failure. They had been ensuring my failure to prove their point about the dangers of independence. This wasn't love or concern. It was vindictive control taken to its most extreme conclusion. Monday morning, I made the hardest decision of my life. Instead of calling my parents to surrender, I called Jake and Maria to propose a new plan. If my reputation in Millbrook was too damaged to rebuild, I would start over somewhere else. If Quantum Business Solutions couldn't survive in this market, I would create something new in a different market. I'm not giving up, I told them. They may have destroyed everything we built here, but they can't destroy what I learned building it. I'm going to prove that this was about their need to control me, not about my ability to succeed. I had hit absolute rock bottom, but I was about to discover that sometimes rock bottom is the solid foundation you need to build something even stronger than what you lost. The decision to start over from absolute zero turned out to be the best choice I ever made, though the first 6 months of rebuilding were the most challenging period of my entire life. I liquidated everything I owned, my car, my furniture, even my professional wardrobe, to raise enough money for a security deposit on a tiny studio apartment in Portland, 3 hours away from Millbrook and everything connected to my past. I chose Portland specifically because it had a thriving startup ecosystem and a culture that valued innovation over traditional credentials. If I was going to rebuild my career and my reputation, I needed to be in an environment where people cared more about what you could accomplish than where you came from, or what your family thought about your choices. My first month in Portland was humbling in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was essentially starting my professional life over from scratch, but now I had the added challenge of explaining why I had left a promising career to join a failed startup. I couldn't put any of my quantum business solutions clients on my resume as references because of the way our relationships had ended, and I couldn't use my parents or anyone from my hometown as character references. I took a temporary position at a small business consulting firm called Northwest Advisory Partners, essentially doing entry-level research and analysis work for a fraction of what I had been earning at Quantum. It was a massive step backward professionally, but I needed income, and I needed to start rebuilding my reputation in a new market. The firm was run by a woman named Dr. Caroline Westbrook, who had built her company from nothing after leaving a corporate consulting position 15 years earlier. Caroline was in her early 50s, brilliant, and completely no-nonsense in her approach to business development. During my interview, I was honest about what had happened with Quantum, though I simplified the story to focus on family conflicts rather than the full scope of the harassment campaign. Family business disputes are more common than people realize, Caroline said after I finished explaining my situation. What matters to me is whether you can deliver results for our clients, not whether your parents approve of your career choices. Working for Caroline turned out to be exactly the education I needed to rebuild my approach to entrepreneurship. She taught me how to systematically analyze market opportunities, how to build client relationships based on trust and results rather than promises, and most importantly, how to protect a business from external threats and reputational attacks. Your parents taught you an important lesson, Caroline told me during one of our weekly strategy meetings. They showed you how vulnerable a business can be to coordinated misinformation campaigns. Now you need to learn how to build companies that are resilient against those kinds of attacks. Under Caroline's mentorship, I started developing a much more sophisticated understanding of business risk management and reputation protection. I learned how to create multiple revenue streams so that losing any single client couldn't cripple the entire operation. I studied legal structures that could protect personal assets from business liabilities. Most importantly, I began building a network of professional relationships based on demonstrated competence rather than personal connections. After 8 months at Northwest Advisory Partners, I had proven myself valuable enough that Carolyn offered me a permanent position as a senior consultant with profit-sharing opportunities. It was a generous offer and would have provided the security and stability my parents had always wanted me to prioritize. Instead, I asked Caroline if she would consider mentoring me as I launched my own consulting practice. I had been developing a specialized approach to helping struggling businesses implement digital transformation strategies, and I believed there was a significant market opportunity for someone who could bridge the gap between technical solutions and practical business needs. "I think you're ready," Caroline said, after reviewing my business plan. "But this time, you're going to do it right. No partnerships with people you've known for 6 months. No putting all your eggs in one basket. And no making yourself vulnerable to personal attacks on your reputation." I spent the next 4 months methodically planning and preparing for the launch of my new company, Apex Strategic Solutions. Instead of jumping in impulsively like I had with Quantum, I took the time to build a solid foundation that could withstand both market challenges and potential personal attacks. I incorporated the business properly, obtained comprehensive insurance coverage, established relationships with multiple banks and financial institutions, and created detailed contracts and legal protections for all client relationships. I also built a diverse portfolio of initial clients across different industries and geographic regions, so that any single loss wouldn't threaten the entire operation. Most importantly, I began documenting everything I did in detail, creating a comprehensive record of my business development process, client interactions, and professional achievements. If anyone ever tried to attack my reputation again, I would have concrete evidence to counter their lies immediately. The launch of Apex Strategic Solutions was methodical and conservative compared to my previous entrepreneurial ventures, but it was also incredibly successful from the very beginning. Within 6 months, I had 12 clients across 4 states, and was generating more revenue than I had ever earned at any previous job. My approach focused on helping traditional businesses integrate modern technology and digital marketing strategies without disrupting their core operations. I specialized in working with family-owned companies and established firms that needed to modernize but were afraid of the risks associated with rapid change. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now helping other people navigate exactly the kind of risk-averse mindset that my parents had tried to impose on me. But instead of judging these clients for their caution, I used my understanding of their concerns to help them find ways to innovate gradually while maintaining the security they valued. By the end of my second year in Portland, Apex Strategic Solutions had grown to employ 6 people and was generating over $800,000 in annual revenue. I had been featured in 2 regional business publications, had spoken at 3 industry conferences, and had been invited to join the board of the Portland Small Business Development Association. More importantly, I had built something that was genuinely mine, not dependent on family approval, not vulnerable to personal attacks, and not limited by other people's understanding of what was possible. I owned my own office space, had diversified revenue streams across multiple industries, and had established professional relationships based purely on the value I could deliver. The personal transformation was even more significant than the professional success. I had learned to trust my own judgment completely, to make decisions based on data and analysis rather than emotion, and to build my life according to my own values rather than other people's expectations. I had also started therapy with Dr. Jennifer Martinez, who specialized in helping entrepreneurs deal with family trauma and boundary issues. Through our work together, I began to understand how my parents' conditional love had shaped my relationship with success and failure, and I learned strategies for maintaining my emotional equilibrium regardless of external validation or criticism. "You've accomplished something remarkable," Dr. Martinez told me during one of our sessions. "You've rebuilt your entire life and career without compromising your authentic values or accepting limitations that other people tried to impose on you. That takes extraordinary courage and resilience." But the most satisfying aspect of my recovery wasn't the financial success or professional recognition. It was the deep sense of peace and confidence I felt about my choices. I was no longer seeking anyone's approval or trying to prove anything to people who couldn't understand my ambitions. I was simply building the life I wanted to live and enjoying the process of becoming the person I was meant to be. 3 years after hitting rock bottom in Millbrook, I was thriving in ways I had never imagined possible. And I was about to receive an opportunity that would bring my transformation full circle in the most unexpected way imaginable. The phone call that would bring everything full circle came on a Tuesday morning in September, exactly 4 years after I had started over in Portland. I was reviewing quarterly financial reports in my corner office overlooking the Willamette River, when my assistant knocked on my door with an unusual expression on her face. "There's a representative from Thornfield Industries on the phone," she said carefully. "They're asking about potential acquisition opportunities, but they specifically requested to speak with you personally. Should I take a message or transfer the call?" My heart stopped. Thornfield Industries, the company where my parents worked. After 4 years of complete no contact, their employer was calling me directly about business. I took a deep breath and told her to transfer the call, though my hands were shaking as I picked up the phone. "Miss Ashford, this is Richard Thornfield, CEO of Thornfield Industries. I hope you don't mind the cold call, but your company has been highly recommended to us as a potential partner for some strategic initiatives we're considering." For a moment, I was speechless. Richard Thornfield had no idea who I was personally. To him, I was just the successful CEO of a growing consulting firm that had come to his attention through industry networks. He had no clue that 2 of his employees were my estranged parents, who had tried to destroy my career 4 years earlier. "I'd be happy to discuss potential partnership opportunities," I managed to say. What kind of strategic initiatives are you considering? Richard explained that Thornfield Industries was facing increased competition from more technologically advanced manufacturers and needed to modernize their operations without disrupting their established workflows. They were looking for a consulting firm that could help them implement digital transformation strategies while maintaining their reputation for reliability and quality. We've heard excellent things about your approach to helping traditional companies embrace innovation, he continued. Several of our industry contacts have mentioned that you have a unique ability to understand both the technical possibilities and the practical concerns that established businesses face when considering major changes. The conversation continued for 30 minutes, and by the end, Richard had invited me to visit their facilities the following week to discuss a potential long-term consulting contract that could be worth over $2 million to my company. It would be the largest client engagement in Apex Strategic Solutions history. After I hung up, I sat in my office trying to process what had just happened. The universe had presented me with the most poetic justice imaginable, the opportunity to become the boss of the people who had tried to destroy my career because they believed I would never amount to anything. I spent the rest of that week preparing for the meeting with obsessive attention to detail. I researched every aspect of Thornfield Industries' operations, analyzed their market position, studied their competitors, and developed preliminary recommendations for their modernization challenges. I wanted to be absolutely certain that I could deliver exceptional value, regardless of the personal dynamics involved. The morning of the facility tour, I chose my outfit carefully, a tailored navy suit that projected authority and competence, paired with the leather portfolio my mother had given me years earlier during our brief period of harmony. The symbolism felt appropriate as I drove toward Elmhurst Heights for the first time in 4 years. Walking into the Thornfield Industries office building was surreal. I had driven past this place countless times during my childhood, never imagining that I would someday enter it as a successful business owner being courted for a major contract. Richard Thornfield met me in the lobby personally, which was unusual for a CEO, but indicated how seriously they were taking this potential partnership. "Ms. Ashford, thank you so much for making the trip out here," he said warmly. "I'm excited to show you our operations and discuss how we might work together." The tour took over an hour, and Richard introduced me to department heads, showed me their manufacturing processes, and explained their current challenges in detail. I took notes, asked thoughtful questions, and began mentally formulating solutions to their most pressing concerns. As we walked through the administrative offices, Richard mentioned that he wanted me to meet some of his key staff members who would be involved in any consulting engagement. "I'll introduce you to our senior accounting team," he said. "They'll be crucial partners in implementing any financial systems changes you might recommend." My pulse quickened as we approached the accounting department. I knew there was a possibility I would see my parents during this visit, but I hadn't been sure it would actually happen. As we rounded the corner into their work area, I saw them both. My father, Robert, hunched over a computer terminal, my mother, Patricia, organizing files at her desk. "Robert, Patricia," Richard called out cheerfully, "I'd like you to meet someone very special. This is Ms. Ashford, the CEO of Apex Strategic Solutions. She's here to discuss a potential consulting partnership that could help us modernize our operations." The moment they looked up and saw me standing there in my professional attire, being introduced as a successful CEO by their own boss, was absolutely priceless. My father's face went completely white, and my mother actually dropped the paper she was holding. For several seconds, they both just stared at me in complete shock. Richard didn't notice their reaction because he was focused on explaining my qualifications. Ms. Ashford has an incredible track record of helping traditional manufacturers implement modern business practices without disrupting their core operations. If we move forward with this partnership, you'll both be working closely with her team. I extended my hand professionally to both of them. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashford," I said with perfect composure. "I look forward to the possibility of working together." My father mechanically shook my hand, still looking stunned. My mother managed a weak smile but seemed incapable of speech. They had no choice but to be polite and professional in front of their CEO, even though I could see the shock and confusion in their eyes. The rest of the meeting proceeded normally, though I noticed my parents exchanging glances and whispering to each other when they thought no one was looking. Richard was completely oblivious to the personal dynamics, focused entirely on the business opportunity. By the end of the day, Richard had offered me a preliminary contract worth $2.3 million over 18 months to lead Thornfield Industries' digital transformation initiative. I would essentially be running a major project for the company where my parents worked, with the authority to implement changes that would affect their daily work lives. "I have to tell you," Richard said as we concluded our meeting, "this feels like exactly the kind of partnership we need. You understand our industry, you respect our culture, and you have the expertise to help us grow without losing what makes us successful." I accepted the contract on the spot, and we shook hands on what would become the most satisfying business relationship of my career. 3 days later, I received a text message from my mother, the first direct communication from either parent in 4 years. "We need to talk," it said simply. I responded immediately. "My office. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. This will be a professional meeting to discuss the Thornfield project." They arrived exactly on time, looking nervous and uncomfortable in a way I had never seen before. For the first time in our relationship, I held all the power, and they were the ones seeking my approval and accommodation. "We had no idea," my mother began hesitantly. "When Richard introduced you, we couldn't believe what we were seeing. You've built all of this yourself?" I gestured around my office, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the awards on the walls, the view of downtown Portland. "Yes, I built all of this myself. After you destroyed my first company and tried to ruin my reputation, I started over from nothing and created something even better." My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We may have overreacted to your decision to leave Bridgepoint. We were concerned about your future, and perhaps we expressed that concern inappropriately." "Inappropriately?" I repeated calmly. "You lied to my clients about my mental health. You filed false complaints with government agencies. You tried to convince people I was running a fraudulent business. That wasn't an appropriate concern. That was systematic sabotage designed to force me back under your control." They both looked genuinely ashamed for the first time I could remember. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that they had no choice but to acknowledge the truth about their behavior. "What do you want from us?" my mother asked quietly. I leaned back in my executive chair and smiled. "I want you to do your jobs professionally and follow the directives that my team provides during the Thornfield project. I want you to treat me with the same respect you would show any other business consultant. And I want you to understand that the daughter you called worthless is now in a position to determine the future of your workplace." "And after the project is complete?" my father asked. "After the project is complete, you'll go back to your lives, and I'll continue building mine. I don't need your approval anymore. I don't want your apologies, and I'm not interested in repairing our relationship. You made your choices 4 years ago, and I've made mine now." As they left my office that day, I felt a profound sense of closure that I hadn't expected. I had proven beyond any doubt that their assessment of my worth and potential had been completely wrong. More importantly, I had proven it to myself. The Thornfield project was a massive success, implementing new systems that increased their efficiency by 35% and their profitability by over 20%. My parents worked under my direction for 18 months, watching me lead meetings, make strategic decisions, and transform their company in ways they had never imagined possible. Today, 5 years later, Apex Strategic Solutions employs 43 people across 3 offices and generates over $15 million in annual revenue. I've been featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine, I've spoken at business conferences around the world, and I've been invited to serve on the boards of multiple industry organizations. But the most satisfying part isn't the money or the recognition. It's the knowledge that I built this life by staying true to my authentic self, even when it cost me everything I thought I couldn't live without. I proved that their love was conditional, but I also proved that I didn't need it to succeed. Sometimes the people who doubt you the most end up providing the greatest motivation to exceed every expectation they never thought you could meet. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.